The heroes you love, the villains you love to hate. Why are characters important? And why are characters important in Dungeons and Dragons? Well, they are the heart of every story, and our favorite characters become core memories of our lives. Characters are written essentially from us. They are a part of us. In essence, they are us. Something about art imitating life and life imitating art. Well, in this episode, I'm going to go back through some of my favorite characters from my past and use those, or show you how you can use those for inspiration in creating your own player characters in Dungeons and Dragons. I'm Chris, and welcome to The Art of Character. This is a Dungeons and Dragons podcast where we get into all things D&D, focusing on the heart of the matter, the characters. Let's roll. So why are characters important? They are fictional, really, and they are creations from us. They are a part of us. And again, a lot of our favorite characters from our past, from movies and books and literature, they are really part of the core memories of our lives. I'm going to go through some of my favorites from the past and show how you can use some of yours as inspiration for creating characters. Why? Well, some people think that, all these players in D&D, everybody has a million ideas for their characters. They know exactly what they want them to be. They know how all of this is going to play out. And that's just not the case, I find. I'm a dungeon master, and a lot of the players that I play with, well, they struggle a little bit with really kind of fleshing out their character and figuring out what all that will mean. And it takes a little bit of time. And that's fine. You see, you don't have to know everything about your character and your backstory and really what your character is up front. You can start off with some broad strokes and kind of get going from there. And I'm going to walk you through that and show you how you might do that yourself. We all know characters from movies, TV, and books, and we all have our favorites. So I want you to think back through, what are some of your favorites? Really just characters that inspired you. Something that inspired you for something you might use as a model for something in Dungeons and Dragons. So just go back through your past and think about that, and I'm going to show you what I did and some of the early characters that were important to me. So we'll do a trigger warning first, because some of the pieces I'm going to mention, they're from the past and they have some problematic elements, and that's really not what we're focusing on, but we'll go ahead and just get that out of the way up front. We're going to talk about some elements of some of the characters that were inspiring to me as a young kid, right? And that are still can be inspiration, using parts of those characters for what I might do in Dungeons and Dragons. And let's face it, a lot of the things we do in Dungeons and Dragons could be considered a little bit problematic. I mean, murder hobo, anyone? So I'm going to go all the way back to the mid-'70s, and some of the earliest TV that I remember that kind of inspired me for the type of adventure I might do in Dungeons and Dragons. There was a show called Emergency and another show called SWAT. And I don't remember a whole lot of specifics from a lot of those characters. I do remember some of them, but what I remember is they just inspired me to this idea of adventure, and they kind of inspired my play. There was no Dungeons and Dragons for me at that age, but I was going outside and playing with my friends. And what we saw there, we would kind of play act, really role play kind of outside, right? Go outside and play, and that's what we did. A couple of other favorites were Davy Crockett, and I just love, coonskin hat and just kind of out there on all these different adventures. Very inspiring, right? Exciting for me as a kid. Another character that I really liked and show was Speed Racer, right? Really early anime. It gets memed a lot. I get it, right? It's super campy, and the dubbing is really kind of infamous for how bad it is. But that's not the point. The point is, I thought Speed Racer was really cool. He was a young kid, right? Not quite as young as me, but he was younger, right? I guess a young adult, really. And he's out there with this great car and all these adventures, fighting against these NPCs and these bad guys, and just kind of all this story woven in there. And I could just see myself as him, this guy out on these adventures with this crew around him. I mean, it just sounds exciting. It's invigorating, right? So some of that early TV, it just sort of inspired some of my early play. So I'm going to make a jump ahead, and everybody kind of has their opinion on this. I guess you may know what's coming, but 1977, Star Wars, the first movie, right? And I stood in line with my dad and, waiting for the movie, and we didn't get in, like it sold out. So we had to come back and we waited in line again, and it was really late. And I vividly remember this and going in. The movie absolutely blew my mind. I was a young kid, still in grade school, and just, wow, fantastic. And so many great characters there, characters you could use for inspiration. And we all have our favorites from Star Wars, or most of us do anyway. My favorite was probably Han Solo, right? The outfit, the blaster, the Millennium Falcon. He's got this sidekick, Chewie, and could just he has a bit of a greedy streak, but he also winds up kind of always doing the right thing, and he's kind of there to back up and fight for his friends. You don't quite know if he's going to follow through, but he does. He's a bit of a wild card, and I just loved Han Solo. So if I were playing Han Solo, I would probably play him as a rogue, right? He's sneaking around, he's stealing stuff. Just seems like a great way to play a rogue using Han Solo as an example. Another great example from the film would be Luke Skywalker. And, Luke, some people say, yeah, he may be a bit annoying in how he's played, etc. But Luke really is, and you could play him two ways. But so he's on this path. He's kind of chosen to become a Jedi. He doesn't really know it. He kind of, is all up for the adventure, good spirited, kind hearted, always wanting to do the right thing, always wanting to do the right thing for his friends. I would play him as a paladin. I would absolutely play him as a paladin. And in later stages of his growth, when he's becoming a Jedi, maybe a flavor and a little bit of monk. I'm not sure. But I think he would just be a great example of kind of this righteous guy fighting for what's right, always kind of standing up for his friends. What better way to play a paladin, right? Then if you go down a little bit further, you could talk about Chewbacca. Chewbacca, I would play him as a bugbear, right? And then as a barbarian, a crossbear wielding bugbear barbarian that doesn't wear clothes. And you just kind of get it. He's there to support the party, and he's really strong, and he's always up for fighting the bad guys. And so he's always kind of got his rage and that sort of thing going on too. And then what about Leia? You want a female hero? Well, she could be played either as a rogue, kind of a mastermind, or maybe even a bard. She's a natural leader, and she is, kind of in the background planning and always inspiring people, and she's got the plan and kind of brings everybody together. So, you could play her either as this kind of rogue, and well, I guess with a bit of a royal background too, right? You can always throw that in. You could have a noble background, but I could play her either as a bard or a rogue. And what about Darth Vader? I mean, quintessential villain, right? And just the whole thing. The first time he comes on the screen, the breathing, just so scary. And I think I would play him, though, as an Oathbreaker paladin. He was once righteous. He was once a Jedi, and then he's fallen with, basically anger and fear take him over, and he falls to the dark side. An Oathbreaker paladin, it's got a little bit of sorceress magic mixed in there also, maybe a little bit of for some flavor there. Not quite sure. But Star Wars has some epic examples you could use for building your own characters or just for inspiration. So I'm going to talk about another one, and this is going way back, 1981. It was a film called Excalibur. Not sure if you've seen it or not, but it's basically Arthurian legend. I'm not going to get into the whole story, but you've got Merlin, right? An absolute wizard, and he's kind of in the background, plotting and really smart, charismatic, and kind of, moving things around in the background, but definitely a wizard. I mean, Merlin, got to be a wizard, right? What about young King Arthur? So he's chosen, he's on this path, he's gonna pull the sword, right? But he is absolutely good and righteous and fighting for what's right all the time. You got to play Arthur as a paladin. And then what about Sir Lancelot? Or Sir Lancelot is one of the best fighters in the realm. So I think you just play him as a fighter. He is also a good character, but he is, absolutely just an amazing, athletically gifted fighter. Good, upstanding, righteous also. And then if you want to throw Morgan or Morgana in there, and she really is just kind of a dark sorcerer. In the background, she's kind of plotting and moving things around and kind of that dark magic, that dark sorceress magic. And you could use her as some inspiration there if you want to go check out the film. So another 1981 classic is got to be Raiders of the Lost Ark, one of my all-time favorites. And one of my all-time favorite characters, Indiana Jones, is played by Harrison Ford. Absolutely iconic. I mean, the whole outfit, I love the whip and the pistol and the hat and the whole deal. The opening scene from that movie, and you've got Indiana Jones and he is raiding this tomb, right? And in raiding the tomb, he's there figuring out if he's going to take this gem. If he does so, he's figuring there's a trap. So he's got this bag of sand, kind of pouring some sand out, putting some sand in, kind of figuring the right weight, and he does the switch. And then the boulder is released and chases him out of the tomb. I mean, that is Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, that is inspiration right there. And I think you got to play. Indy to me is a rogue, highly charismatic. He's an excellent fighter, but really he does a lot of sneaking, and he's a lot of negotiating, high charisma, high persuasion, not really intimidating, but I guess a little bit with the whip sometimes, kind of bluffing and kind of figuring things out. So you got to play him as a highly intelligent, kind of adventurous rogue, I think. To me, that makes the most sense. And Indiana Jones has a lot of luck, right? So I don't think you play him as a halfling, but that would be interesting, kind of with the halfling luck trait. But I always wanted to be Indiana Jones. So another film would be Rambo, 1981, and everybody knows a Rambo character, right? It's just willing to rush into battle and just fight against all the odds and spraying his machine gun everywhere. And you can kind of get a similar idea with Dungeons and Dragons. But that's not exactly how Rambo First Blood plays out. He is plotting and sneaking all around and incredibly skilled with all kinds of different, kind of skills that he can apply, setting traps and ambushes and really kind of outthinking his opponent every turn. And for all the violence that there is in Rambo, there's actually only one person killed in that first movie. He's also got this unstoppable rage and this thirst for revenge, really, right? And so I think you can easily play him either as a barbarian, right, with the rage and but a highly skilled barbarian and a stealthy barbarian, or you could also play him as a fighter, just a very, very skilled at the fighting arts, but smart also with a lot of skills just for, and doing a lot of sneaking around and stealth. I think that's how you play Rambo or a character like that, really. So then we're going to jump up to 1982, Conan the Barbarian. What a fantastic movie. And I've gone back and watched it again recently. It's pretty campy, pretty cheesy, but it is absolutely Dungeons and Dragons. So there are four main characters really for this movie. You've got Conan, and he is, well, by title, a barbarian, but he's got a little bit of rogue thrown in also. He is stealthy, he sneaks around, he's got kind of his own way with charisma, but in two of the main scenes in the movie, I'll talk about them in a minute, they are really do a great job just kind of sneaking in and infiltrating, and then there's combat once they get in. So Conan, though, really, I guess one of his downfalls is just kind of his lust for vengeance, right? For revenge upon the things that happened to him in the trauma when he was a kid. So, but anyway, I think you got to play him probably as a stealthy barbarian with a little bit of with a lot of skills thrown in, or maybe even a level dip or two into rogue for some of those abilities. And then there's Sabotai. So his kind of sidekick is this rogue archer kind of a character. Excellent archer, really sneaky. Definitely you play him as a rogue. There's a wizard, Akiro. So he's a necromancer. He actually brings one of the characters back from the dead. Smart, and he's kind of the narrator of the story, right? Pretty cool role that you could be. Not quite a bard kind of a narrator, but he's definitely the narrator. And then there's Valeria. So she is a fighter, and she is Conan's equal when it comes to actual fighting ability. And just this cool, strong character, loyal. She's driven by love, and she's right there with Conan, along for the adventure. Conan's ride or die. And I'm not going to spoil what happens, but there's quite a bit of story involved. So two of the main things that they do, and they're just really cool scenes, I'll point them out without doing too many spoilers. So one is they infiltrate this this kind of snake god temple, and they're climbing down on this rope and they sneak in, and anyway, they steal this gem, the eye of the serpent, which is it's just a really cool scene and kind of a great heist example or inspiration. And then there's another scene at the end where they're fighting against this bad guy Doom, actually James Earl Jones, and again, I think they steal the robes of the cult members, and they're sneaking into this temple to interrupt this ceremony. And anyway, they wind up being heroes and interrupting the ceremony, and it's pretty cool. So then we'll talk about Blade Runner, 1982, right? Again, another Harrison Ford character. I love Harrison Ford. And really, though, he is an investigator, but he's also really a bit of a monster hunter, right? If you take that on as a D&D type of a role. And so I think you could play him one of two ways. He's using cunning, he's using stealth, and, all along the way, it's like he's making all the bad rolls and, somehow figuring things out at the end, and just kind of a great inspiration for a way a D&D story can go. Somehow they're making it out, even though they're making some of the wrong rolls, making some of the wrong choices. So you could play Deckard, Harrison Ford's character, as a rogue. And I think you could also play him as a ranger, right? Either way works in kind of this context. But you're being stealthy, you're sneaking around, and you're trying to find bad guys or monsters, essentially. So another one of my favorites from way back then would be James Bond. And I get it. A lot of his older stuff is, they've got a lot of problematic elements. But if you use James Bond really as a character, not focusing on the problematic elements, but he is suave, debonair, impossibly cool, really smart, an excellent fighter, super high charisma, and, just kind of an excellent way to play. Again, I think this has got to be a rogue, not really a bard, but he is just a rogue with super high charisma, sneaking around, also got some excellent combat capabilities, but really just kind of outthinking his opponents, getting out of puzzles and traps and all that kind of thing, and just kind of this very suave, impossibly cool kind of a character. And, I kind of like that with a rogue personally. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit and kind of change genres up a little bit. So this is one of my favorite movies, The Goonies, 1985. And this movie gave me a ton of inspiration as a kid. I mean, here they are. It's essentially like some kids fall into almost like a D&D type of adventure, right? They're just goofing around, checking out this old house, and next thing you know, there's some bad guys. Oh, and then, they wind up going down into this cellar and wind up following this path, and they're looking for One-Eyed Willie. They have this treasure map, right? They're off on this hunt, and is really cool. The traps, and then eventually they wind up finding One-Eyed Willie's pirate ship and the gold and the treasure and helping to save the town. They get to be heroes. A great kind of a Dungeons and Dragons story. So a couple of the main characters from there that I really liked, Mikey Walsh, and he is a natural leader. He is inspirational. He's always kind of keeping their spirits up. I think you play Mikey as a bard, right? Kind of the core, the heart of the party, the face, and just bringing everybody along and keeping their spirits up. I mean, that's kind of how you play a bard. And then there's Data. I really liked Data as a kid. All of his gadgets and kind of quirky behavior. And I think that is just a great way to have inspiration, maybe for playing an artificer or something like that, with with all of his gadgets and creations and stuff like that. All right, we're going to jump ahead a little bit, just a year, 1986, Stand By Me. Again, one of my favorites. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but Stand By Me, written by Stephen King, was written in a set of 4 short stories. Stand By Me was originally called The Body, and another one of the stories in that compilation became Shawshank Redemption. So some great writing in this book of short stories. I happened to cross it and just read it as a kid, and the next thing I know, going through Stand By Me, as I was like, I've read this. I know what this is. And the same thing when I saw Shawshank Redemption, a little bit into the movie, I was like, I know exactly where this came from. It's always cool when that happens. Didn't have the internet back then, so you didn't really have all this press and this lead in about a movie beforehand, and you knew exactly where it came from. You just didn't. So, Stand By Me, one of my favorite characters. So, Chris, played by River Phoenix, and he is absolutely the soul of the party. Charming, witty, funny, impossibly cool for a kid, right? And he is bringing them all along on this adventure. He's well aware, too, of kind of the realities of the world and trauma, and has his own trauma. They talk about Chris. He always makes the best peace, right? When they have a little conflict and fight in the group. So you could play him as a rogue, but I really think you play Chris as a bit of a bard. Again, kind of the heart of the character, this inspiration, bringing them all along, uplifting them, helping everybody out with some of their little challenges and problems as they come along. A great support character in the background. So I like Chris as a bard. 1987, The Princess Bride. One of my favorites. A great story, just kind of quirky, campy, fun, lots of banter. It'd be a great fun way to run a campaign, and lots of good inspirational characters there that you could use also. So Wesley, the good-looking blonde, he is the Dread Pirate Roberts, and really is a stereotypical kind of a rogue swashbuckler. He's there to do good. He's a good guy, but he also kind of has this charismatic swashbuckling streak about him, and it would just be a fun character to play. What about Inigo Montoya? I'm Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. His tagline, right? Amazing. Taglines are wonderful. So he is absolutely a swordsman, a master with the sword. So he is a fighter and one of the best out there. I mean, he kills people. They don't even know when they're cut. He's so good with their sword. He's so fast. They don't even know when it happened. And he is absolutely on a revenge path. But I think you can play kind of a swordsman, excellent with the sword, always wanting to sword fight, always wanting to duel, and just an excellent fighter. Great character too, right? He's got his tagline. And then one of my favorites also is Fezzik, Andre the Giant's character. I think you got to play him as a barbarian. So he's friendly, kind of happy-go-lucky, and in this case, he's a bad guy. Like he's, going to apologize before he kills you or before he hurts you, that kind of thing. Anyway, I love Andre the Giant's character here, and just kind of a good jovial way to play a barbarian if that's what you want to do. So we're jumping up to what I think is 2001. Jumping ahead several years, absolutely amazing. Lord of the Rings, right? So I'd read the books, I knew the story, but to see how they brought it to life was just truly incredible. And a lot of people have, things to nitpick about the story and not holding true to all these things about Tolkien. But I'll tell you this much, Tolkien was such an inspiration that early D&D outright ripped off a lot of things from Tolkien, and there were lawsuits, and they had to go back and change some of those things in the books. Hobbits were one who became halflings, for example. All right. So my three kind of favorite characters from the story, and you can really pick any of the characters, and they would be great inspiration for your characters in Dungeons and Dragons. And it's an excellent kind of a view of a grand campaign, really, right? Put all three of the first trilogy together. What a fantastic, amazing, grand campaign you could play out, or something like that. But my three are the three G's. So I loved Gimli and this dwarf fighter, and I think the Scottish accent is absolutely perfect for a lot of dwarves. I'm not great with the Scottish accent, but just he loves beer, he loves food, but he is so good-hearted, hates orcs, always willing to fight the bad guys, always wants to, being held back almost from fighting the bad guys, and is absolutely going to jump headfirst into battle. He is a fighter, like the fighter's fighter, just an archetype, really, an absolute tank, putting himself, in the front, in the face of danger, and absolutely willing to fight for his friends at every turn and fight for good. So one of the other G's, I don't know if it's everybody's favorite, but Gandalf. I mean, what an amazing wizard, and just a great example and an inspiration for the wizard. He's got the wizard beard and the wizard cloak and the wizard staff, wearing a hat sometimes, and just absolutely amazing. His use of the spells and sort of how he does that. The words that he speaks. So when you talk about having spell components and verbal and somatic components, kind of the gestures and the words, just an excellent example of how you might cast a spell, what that might look like if you were role-playing, casting a spell, and that's something that's pretty cool to do. but just he's also a leader and really a core of the party and helping drive not only the story along but keeping everybody together and driving the party along. And just what an amazing way to play a wizard, really smart and a charismatic leader, and obviously fighting for good. And then one of my other favorites would be Lady Galadriel. And so she is kind of really almost like an NPC, but you would play her as this very high level, I think, a light cleric, right? Just the light, overcoming the dark, and just kind of there aiding and pushing along the characters, showing up here and there to help them out in a few places. But I love Lady Galadriel. And anyway, tons of inspiration you can get from Lord of the Rings and playing characters from there. So one of the more modern ones would be Guardians of the Galaxy. And a lot of people say that they are really kind of a modern D&D party incarnate, and so many great characters there. Such a great story. Ragtag bunch, all different types of characters, and they've got some conflicts, they've got a lot of banter, they've got all these NPCs and people that they've crossed up in the past that are going to come back and cross them up again, and really a kind of a complicated story going on, but just a fantastic story where they are ultimately fighting for good and fighting to save the galaxy. So one of the great characters there is Star-Lord. And you can really play him one of two ways, but he is highly charismatic, intelligent, always coming up with a plan. And I think you can play him either as a rogue or as a bard, right? Just because of his inspirational capabilities, keeping everybody together, and just kind of being the heart of the party. But I can see him going either way, as a rogue or a bard. And then one of my other favorites is Drax the Destroyer, this shirtless guy. And if concrete thinking could be personified, that's him. Just very literal in how he thinks, and just kind of what an amazing quirk you could add to your character, right? Like, no matter what is said, interpreting that literally could be a bit problematic at times, but also funny. You just don't want to take it too far. But Drax is a barbarian. He's got the rage and just, an amazing fighter, but you got to play him as a barbarian. And then you have Gamora. So you want a female hero. She is a rogue assassin. She is a trained killer, and she is really, really good at it, and that's what she does. But doing so for the side of good, right? And driving forward the story and fighting against bad guys. You can still be an assassin fighting against bad guys. So I think a way to finish this off with some character examples to be inspiring are some canon D&D characters. We're going to start it off with some bad guys first, just because I think these are easy to visualize and get examples. So Stranger Things came about and made Vecna kind of really cool and really popular, and a lot of people kind of read up on Vecna, right? So he is this lich and just pure evil. And lots of times in the background, they don't really know if is it Vecna, is it not Vecna, but what an amazing big bad, right? And when he does come onto the screen, just kind of hissing and growling and the way that he speaks, and just so intimidating and so frightening and so powerful. That's how I want a lot of my big bads to be, Vecna, right? Then another one, another lich, a Sararak, an incredibly fun, big bad to play. So this guy is all about creating dungeons to trap explorers and adventurers so he can, toy with them, torture them, kill them, and then keep their souls, which kind of helps fuel and power him and some of his grand plans and designs. Kind of like Vecna, always has some grand, bigger plans for taking over the world, taking over the galaxy, becoming a god, something like that. Pretty big plans. Another really kind of fun, quirky, interesting character to play is Xanathar, right? So I've got a little mini of him right back over there. But basically a bulbous head with a big one eye and a smile, and then a bunch of stalks with eyes on the top. And Xanathar is a mafia, kind of a crime boss, really. Really quirky, funny, super paranoid, running this kind of a crime family, and or running this crime organization, if you will. And I think one of the best, quirkiest, funniest things about him is he has this pet goldfish, Silgar, one of the most important and valuable things to him in all the world. Okay, let's pivot and talk about some player characters from D&D lore, or canon, if you will. And I think one of the ones we got to talk about is Drizzt. So he is a drow, or a dark elf, and, there were some problematic elements for how they treated or talked about the drow in older versions of D&D. But in essence, the culture lived underground. A lot of them were evil and worshipped this evil goddess Loth, the spider god, right? And the capital of their culture was Mezzobranzan. And so Drizzt is born there, part of this culture, and he wants to fight against it. He's not a bad guy. He wants to come to the surface and sort of fight against the evil of his people and, the evil of his background, really, and fight for good. He's got kind of his own code of ethics and morals, and he's really driven forward. And Drizzt is this kind of an amazing personification of a ranger in the way that he is just out there sort of hunting, and he has these two scimitars, and, it's really just a great written character. There are several books about him that you can read and kind of follow the lore and the history and the story of Drizzt. A couple of others, we'll talk about the wizard Mordenkainen. He has his own book also in D&D 5th edition, but Mordenkainen was a wizard that was the player character, one of the player characters of Gary Gygax, right? One of the co-founders, co-authors of original Dungeons and Dragons. And really just kind of a mythical figure in all of D&D, Gary Gygax. And Gary Gygax was a problematic individual. But Mordenkainen, just an archmage and all about balance between good and evil, and always kind of, very intelligent, but always kind of plotting in the background and manipulating things for his own gain or the way that he wants things to be. And that would be a great way to run a character also, right? Somebody that's kind of always plotting and kind of doing things in the background and manipulating things for his own gain. You got to be careful running, too much against your own party, but it's a great way to play a character. And kind of the counter to Mordenkainen would be the wizard Elminster. So he's chosen of the goddess Mystra, and really is more of a good wizard. Now, he is also about the balance between good and evil, and he is absolutely, a centerpiece in the Forgotten Realms lore. This pipe-smoking, good-natured wizard, but again, they're about the balance between good and evil. A little bit different, not as plotting for his own designs in the same way that Mordenkainen is, which feels a little more evil, and, Elminster feels a little more good. Smoking the pipe reminds me a lot of Gandalf, and that's kind of his shtick, the pipe, right? So hopefully this gave you some ideas for some things you can do with your characters. You don't have to have it all figured out up front. Some broad strokes will do. And go back through the characters, some of your favorites from movies, from film, from books, from your childhood. Something that would be fun to kind of recreate and bring forward, or just take some elements of that and just go from there. You can very easily take classes from Dungeons and Dragons and apply them to characters and fictions and move forward with a character concept that's a little bit of art, right? It's not just science. There's no one perfect way to create a character. Yes, dice rolls and stats and skills and all that stuff, and you can min-max and do all sorts of other things. And if you want to do that, fine, great. But creating a character can be fun, and it's a bit of an art form. So I wish you luck on all your future adventures. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep rolling. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Art of Character podcast, where we publish new Dungeons and Dragons related content each and every week. If you want to support the channel, you can like, comment, or subscribe, or click below and you can join our Patreon, or click below and you can purchase something from our merch store, like this really cool t-shirt just like this. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us.